Alright, what's up guys? Quick video today. We actually do have a brand new ban list on Master Duel, which will be having a massive impact on the metagame, as I would imagine. I haven't really looked into it too much yet. I just kind of opened the page. But this is MasterDuelMeta.com. It's just, the Master Duel ban list is just way more organized here than it is in the regular... inside the app, because this one actually gives you pictures, whereas the app does not give you pictures. So we're going to go through it one by one here. So starting off right off the bat, we have Trickstar Light Stage. This is going unlimited, so we can play 3 copies. It went from 2 to 3. Why was it 2? I don't know. Why was it? It used to be at 1 also. So this card used to be a 1 card full Orcus combo, so they hit it to 1. But that happened before Master Duel even came out. So it was like a ban that happened years ago before, and then they banned Nightmare Mermaid anyway, so none of that mattered. And then Master Duel came out, and they could have taken this off the ban list, but they didn't. But finally, this card comes off the ban list. What implications does it have? Honestly, not much. I mean, this deck gets more consistent, gets better, but at the end of the day, as good as this field spell is for the archetype, it's not. The archetype itself is not really that crazy these days. It's just a little bit too underwhelming. It makes definitely the FTK more consistent. It makes the Trickstar reincarnation plus Droll more consistent. Like, it makes a lot of things more consistent, but at the end of the day, the deck itself is not powerful enough to really compete with some of the better decks in the game. Next is Chronograph Sorcerer. This card is at 1. It should have never been at 1. There's many other cards that you can hit in a Pendulum deck that are not Chronograph Sorcerer. The new route of the Pendulum deck in general actually either plays 1 or sometimes 3 of this card. It plays either 1 or none of this card, so getting put to 3 doesn't really matter. Recently, Pendulum decks have been more leaning towards kind of a Supreme King build with some of the new Supreme King support. That stuff is just much better than Chronograph. At most, I've seen 1 Chronograph, even in like TCG builds that can play as many as they want. But then again, in the TCG, you don't even have Metal Foes Electromite, so it's an interesting thing to bring up, but I don't think it's that crazy. Next is Lightning Storm. Lightning Storm goes from 3 to 2 copies per deck. So Lightning Storm is a very strong card in Master Duel. It is very good in a best of 1 format. The reason that they hit this is to hit Tenpai. Now, Lightning Storm, like I said, is phenomenal in a best of 1 format, where if you're a Tenpai player, you know you're going to be able to go second, so you don't have to worry about like Lightning Storm's drawbacks, which is if there's cards on the field. So this card essentially is like a guaranteed Harpy's Featherduster or Raigeki anytime that you want to. It's a very, very strong card in this type of a format, 100%. So it going to 2 makes sense. They don't want to hit Tenpai directly yet. The pack is still in circulation. It's still one of the most recent packs to be released, so usually they will wait till the pack is circulated out in order to hit the deck directly. That's why Lightning Storm is going to 2. Secondly, the truth is about Tenpai, as good of a deck as it is, it does have its drawbacks. It can have trouble sometimes playing through floodgates, and by hitting a board breaker like this, it definitely makes it even more susceptible to floodgate like effects, and just generally, like, if you don't draw hand traps with that deck and your opponent's playing some sort of a deck that puts up like a really good board, it can be very difficult for you to end the game. So next is the limited section. D-Shifter to 1. This is like, is a weird one, because it's like it makes sense 100%. D-Shifter is an annoying card to play against, particularly when you're playing like Tearlaments or something. You're trying to play Tearlaments, you're trying to play Lightsworns, they drop a D-Shifter, it's like guaranteed you have to end your turn. So in that regard, there's a lot of decks, and I would say the majority of modern Yu-Gi-Oh decks rely on the graveyard very, very much. So Tenpai can easily splash in a Shifter, and Shifter hasn't really been a problem in Master Duel up until this point, because the only deck that really could use it was maybe like Exo Sister, like Exo Sister, Kashtira. Like, there were decks that could use it, but they always opted to either hit the deck directly in the case of Kashtira, or they opted not to hit the deck at all in the case of like Exo Sister. But there's a very small handful of decks that could even use D-Shifter, but now D-Shifter getting hit to 1 obviously makes it a lot less consistent. And again, this is one of those cards that is typically, I wouldn't say the biggest problem, but in a best of 1 format, this is a very annoying card, because if they drop it and you don't have a Call by the Grave, you lose because you end your turn, and then if they are playing Tenpai, they OTK you. If they're not playing Tenpai, it's something like a Kashtira, and they set up, you know, a board that now you're having to play through. But Kashtira can OTK you also. So in a sense, this was like, in decks that could use D-Shifter, they were pretty much like a 5th and 6th, basically like a 4th and 5th copy of Max C, where Max C, you have to end your turn when they activate it. This was another card. Like, they activate it, you have to end your turn. So essentially, if they can run, if they could play a deck that can run D-Shifter, it created this situation where they have 5 cards in their deck that guaranteed ended your opponent's turn on their turn. So even if you won coin flips, you really lost them. So this card was very, very annoying. Going to 1, a lot of people would argue it should be banned. That's debatable. Next is Fairy Tale Snow. This is going from 3 to 1. This card can be extremely, extremely toxic, especially in multiples, but in reality, most people play this at 1. Like, even in 60 card decks, most people play it at 1. If they mill it, they use it. If they don't mill it, they don't use it. Like, you rarely ever see anybody play multiple copies of Fairy Tale Snow because there's just no need to. It's not that the card is once per turn. It's actually the opposite. The card is not once per turn. So you really only need 1 copy of it in the graveyard, and you're good to go. You never need multiple Fairy Tale Snows. And the cost is to, you know, banish 7. So the cost still remains. It doesn't matter how many of them you have in the grave. Again, it's not a once per turn card, so you can banish 7. Even if your opponent like chains call by, you can again banish 7, activate. It's not once per turn in any way, as you can see here whatsoever. The card is a quick effect. Nothing on here is once per turn. So this card is already built to be played at 1. So the truth is, with Fairy Tale Snow, it's either at 3 or at 0, and that's a decision Konami's going to have to make. So if this card is too broken to be played in the game, then perhaps it's time to get rid of it rather than put it to 1, because putting it to 1 really actually doesn't do anything. Psy-Frame is going from 2 to 1. Honestly, this card, again, this is another Tenpai hit. This is the third indirect Tenpai hit. This is indirect Tenpai, indirect Tenpai, indirect Tenpai. Psy-Frame Gear Gamma in Tenpai was absolutely sick, because usually you're playing Psy-Frame Gear Gamma in a combo deck, so you're hoping that you activate one of your spell cards and then your opponent chains, like you're activating like Emergency Teleport and your opponent chains like an Ash Blossom or something like that, and then you chain Gamma and you get advantage, which is the 2 monsters plus negating and destroying the effect. So it was essentially the thing with this card is it's pretty much a guaranteed +2, which was really, really broken in a going second deck, because again, your opponent activates a monster effect, you destroy that card, and you summon 2 monsters, and then you can take those 2 monsters and then you can turn it into a Psy-Frame Lord, which will take a card out of your opponent's hand, or it just drops a monster at 2800 attack. Or you can go into, because there's no restriction on these monsters, there's no restriction on what you can synchro summon with this. So you can synchro summon it into, like, I don't know, like Borreload Savage Dragon with this. You can synchro summon into anything. It just gives you a free rank 8 on top of a monster negation. So in a deck like Tenpai, it's honestly just a little too broken. And then we have another card. This is the last hit. It is Pot of Prosperity. This is another, again, it's an indirect Tenpai hit. So you look at this, it's 1, 2, 3, 4 indirect Tenpai hits, and then a couple of removals, and Fairy Tale Snow is just for like 60 card decks. But generally, this ban list was created to hit Tenpai. Pot of Prosperity is basically, it gives you so much extra, not search power, but like it lets you look deep into your deck. 6 cards deep into your deck. Yeah, you banish 6 from your extra deck, but Tenpai, again, really only needs realistically 3 cards in their extra deck to OTK you, and they do so much damage. It's actually kind of outrageous how much damage. It really is actually outrageous how much damage Tenpai does. They can do like 45,000 damage, like easily, off of a 1-card combo. They can do 45,000 damage. So this Pot of Prosperity, in reality, is actually a pretty substantial hit against them, because it doesn't let them dig as deep into their deck. Now, at the same time, you know, I'm going to kind of miss this card. I like Pot of Prosperity personally. I think it was a cool design card, but I can imagine why it becomes a little bit too broken, because it's a consistency card that is maybe too consistent. And in the TCG and the OCG, the card is at 1. You could argue it's the most broken pot card ever printed. You could easily argue that, because the other ones have much more severe restrictions. Like Extravagance is much more severe in its restrictions, because obviously things are getting banished randomly. You can end up banishing things you actually want. This you actually get to choose, so it can turn itself into basically one of 6 cards in your deck. It adds too much consistency to meta decks, and most meta decks were actually playing this card. It is a very, very, very strong card, and I can understand why it's getting banned, and it's going from 1 to 3. Again, you can even make the argument this card's better than Pot of Greed, because again, Pot of Greed just lets you draw 2 cards. This lets you dig 6 deep and lets you get your 1 card starter that you need out of those 6 cards, whereas the Pot of Greed just lets you draw 2. You could end up drawing a brick, you could end up drawing 2 cards that don't matter, you could end up drawing hand traps, you know, going second. Like, there's a lot of things that you could draw going second that don't matter with Pot of Greed, whereas Pot of Prosperity, you look at the 6 cards, you pick one. It's actually better in a lot of ways than Pot of Greed. So there goes Pot of Prosperity. But this is the ban list. Like I said, everything here was pretty much to hit Tenpai without actually hitting Tenpai, because there's a monetary reason for that. We'll say that. Well, there's a financial incentive. We'll say that. But thank you for watching, and I know it's a short video, but it's important.
Are you ready to take your Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Dual Play experience to a new level? The Untapped GG Companion is here for you. Use the deck tracker to know exactly what cards you have in your deck, and to go over any cards you aren't familiar with yet by hovering over them. It instantly updates when you draw a card, and automatically hides if you check your extra deck or graveyard. This is the perfect tool to help you master a new deck. The Untapped GG Companion also lets you import decks directly into the game in seconds. Copy any YDK or YDKE deck string, create a new deck in-game, click the Start Auto Import button, and let us take the wheel. Once the duel is over, check your win rate on your personal stats page. Brag among your friends and share your decks so they can import them into the game too. Start your path to master today by downloading the Untapped GG Companion at ygom.untapped.gg.